Hello, welcome to the WalkSnail Part 2 video. In Part 1, I pretty much walked through what the goggles would do and all the options, and I found I didn't know what some of the options do, so I followed that up with WalkSnail and I've got some answers. I'll talk to you about that later. And then I connected up the VTXs kind of manually, did things like walk around my garden, see how they would work with the goggles, see how, to unlock them, to give you all the channels and the extra bit rate. But now it's time to put it on a quad, because that's essentially what we're doing. As time goes by, I also want to put this on a play, but I thought I'd start with a quad because I'm very familiar with that and it's pretty easy and you don't have to wait for the nice calm days. And I know lots of you guys that watch this video will be wanting to put things on quads as well. The quad I chose to use is the Chimera 7. Now, I was using this for an Open HD quad, but I had some problems with the camera when I was trying to do it, and the new version of Open HD won't support the Pi Zero that I've got on it, so I decided to take that off. Luckily, I made that in a very much a modular way, so it was easy to take off all in one and I could just put the next bit on. I didn't want to go into too much detail about what I did on the quad, because of course all quads are different. Essentially what you will need is a spare UART on your flight controller, where you will connect the TX to the RX and the RX to the TX. To and from the VTX, which is pretty basic. But I'll give you some info about what I did on my Chimera and what sort of problems I ran into. Now, initially I thought my first WalkSnail flight would be with this. This is the Happen model baseline, and it would be so easy to do it because I just connect to it and go fly. But I thought, it's really useful to put these together yourself and know what you're dealing with and know how to work Betaflight and stuff like that. So that's why I decided to put one of these VTXs on one of my quads first. So here's the bits of Open HD hardware removed. That's the Pi Zero and camera. They just pop out, and as you can see, it's just a couple of leads and I can connect it back up again if I want to. And this left a fair amount of space. The camera there is back on because it was in those two things that slot into the frame, and you can see we've got a nice big section at the back there to put the VTX in. The only problem I found, I just laid this out and I thought, that's a little bit short. It could be just a bit longer and I'd be able to get it in those mounting holes. But what I did, I sort of managed to get the wire underneath, and then the next thing was about how do I get power to it. I didn't really want to put a 6S battery straight into it, so I wanted to see if I could use the flight controller. Okay, well it kind of fits, it's quite close here, but my main task was trying to find a voltage out of here. I couldn't find the proper documentation for this board online. I found this one that I had to really blow up to see if there was a 9-volt output, and I've just wired this up here so I can check it, and yeah, we're getting a steady 9 volts, so I can make up the cable here. The question mark is the rest of it going to be right. So the next two wires are like T1 R1, so I need to make sure that hooks up correctly to the wires here. I also had a bit of an issue that the mounting hole for the VTX antenna was massive, and the current one would just flop around in there, so I needed to think of a way of fixing that. Okay, I think we're ready to close up. We've got the camera mounted in, the wire runs underneath to the VTX here. That is on a sort of 3D printed board and mounted. What I would like is a longer cable so I can mount that properly. They do 20cm cables. I did talk to WalkSnail and ask if I could have one, and they complained that they were a bit expensive. Not to them, I expect their pennies, but they didn't want to send me one. To get the antenna through the hole here, I made a little 3D printed TPU part that basically gets tight around that bit and tight around the hole just to hold that in. And of course we've got the 9-volt going into the board here, and we've got the TX and RX to T2 and R2, obviously reversed, and hopefully that's going to work. So I can move on now to seeing what we have to do in Betaflight to tell it, hey, we've got a digital VTX, so we need to do something different about how the OSD works. Okay, so we're back to the Avatar V2 notes, finding out how we hook this up, and basically we've already joined the UARTs up on UART 2, and it says here we have to set the UART to MSP, and then run this set OSD DisplayPort MSP, and then set DisplayPort MSP serial equals Y, where Y is 1 less the number of the serial port. So I think if you've got UART 2, you'd say 1 there. I think that's anyway. There are different rules for Betaflight 4.4 and I'm on 4.2.9. I would upgrade this to 4.4, but I'm very much to the tradition of only changing one thing at once. So the big change here is I'm introducing WalkSnail. So what we're going to do here is disable the telemetry which is on there. We're going to add the MSP which is on UART2, and let's save and reboot that. Then going to connect again, go to CLI, and basically I'm just going to copy it. So set OSD DisplayPort device equals MSP. Okay, and then we're doing set display what is it, port MSP serial equals 1. Okay, then we're going to try adding power and see if we get a picture. At this point I don't know exactly what the OSD is going to look like. Obviously it says it looks like this currently, and there's no special things here to say, hey, you've got a digital OSD, you have different things. So I think it still works on this normal block thing where you move things about in this grid. But we'll find out. I'll turn it on and see. So I powered on the quad and yay, I get an OSD. I mean, don't worry about the question marks, that's the VTX information which it obviously hasn't got for this. But it's only in the centre of the screen and I'm thinking, well, is there anything we can do about that? So I tried going into the OSD position and moving that about, but there's nothing to stretch it. Basically we've got an OSD taking up a weird part of the screen. And if I look at the release notes, I do notice that for Betaflight 4.4 there is a specific section about HD displays, and one of the things it does, it changes the number of columns. You get many more columns and rows compared to what you'd get on analog. So it breaks my own rules slightly, but I think what I'm going to do before anything else is upgrade this quad to Betaflight 4.4. Okay, we've updated that. I thought it was going to be about 5 minutes, which turned out to be like an hour, because although I was going into bootloader mode, the firmware flasher would not recognise DFU, and eventually I ended up disconnecting every single UART until it finally worked. Apparently this is not an uncommon problem, but in all the things I flashed in my life I've never once hit it. I did find out by looking through that this particular board, which is the iFly F7 Twin-G, seemed to have a problem with 441, so I flashed it to 440. So what I'm just going to do, basically I've restored my settings I had. There's probably some more bits to do. I just wanted to go through and do the setup. So if we go into ports, you see we've still got our UART2 set to MSP, and what we do this time apparently for 4.4 is if we go over to peripherals here, then we get a new thing which says VTX MSP plus DisplayPort. So let's do that, and let's save and reboot. Okay, so now we go into CLI, and I think it should be already set. If we do OSD DisplayPort device, that is set to MSP, which is correct, but the slight difference here is we want to do set VCD video system. Oh, I have to spell it right. Equal to HD, like that. And I just want to check if my old settings there. No, MSP serial is not there anymore, so I don't have to worry about unsetting that. There's also this is the stuff from the documentation in the Avatar release notes. If I go to the 4.4 release notes, it talks about using the set DisplayPort MSP fonts to get different colours. I just want to see what that's set to at the moment, and it's currently set to 0000. Now I don't know if we've got full colour fonts, but I'll try sticking that in for now to see what happens. Right, so then if we go over to OSD, at the moment this all looks the same. Oh no, it doesn't, because we've got HD. So we've got PAL, NTSC, then HD. Aha! that looks like a few more columns, doesn't it? That's better. Right. Now it also says in the Betaflight release notes that we can get additional OSD elements if supported, things like goggle battery voltage, VTX voltage, video link quality, that sort of thing. So that would mean if they're there, there's no reason to have them in the goggles themselves. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to try and set this up and see what we get. And we do have things like goggle DVR status, goggle fan speed, link quality. So this is things to check out. This is useful. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and set this up, and I'll show you what I've got in a second. Okay, so what I did, I put all the elements I wanted on the screen. These are all sort of goggle DVR, goggle voltages, and I got the megabits and stuff like that. Trouble is, when I look at the actual display I get, I don't get that stuff. I don't know if this is like a WalkSnail which doesn't pass this stuff through or not. The good news is you can go ahead and you can move about elements live on the screen. So that was just a little bit off the screen. If I move that back, it's good. I did get this one through, which is the VTX power, but that seems wrong anyway, so I'm going to turn that off. Everything else, what I've done, I've positioned it around and rejigged things slightly so they all look, you know, about central, and they avoid the goggle stuff. So, you know, I still want to see that. Anyway, I think that's all I want to do with it for now, and I can try and fly it. There are some different fonts around. What I'm doing, I'm using the absolute default font to start with. I'm going to do how to change fonts in a different video. For now, I'm going to go and try and hover this in the garden, make sure it's okay, and I'm going to take it out for a proper flight and make sure I'm all happy with everything. So here's my very short garden hover, and I've just got the goggles inside while I'm just doing a line of sight hover. It was mainly just to check that the quad worked. You will notice that this DVR recording has got OSD information on there, and this is done after the event. The DVR recording is just the image, and we put the OSD information on later. I'll be going through exactly how to do that later on after I've done a proper flight. And let's do that bit next. I'm perfectly happy this is working. I didn't get a chance to test the GPS out. Hopefully that's going to be okay, but it's not critical. Well, here we are. It's flying day. We've got the quad with the WalkSnail stuff on it. We've got our goggles ready, and I'll be flying with the Radio Master Boxer. I was only here a couple of weeks ago for flying the Dark Drift, I think, and since that time, have a look at the grass. It's jumped up about 2 feet. This is what happens when there's a bit of sunshine and rain, I guess. Anyway, so what I'll be doing is obviously taking this for a fly. One thing I didn't check is how good the GPS signal was with the digital system in it. I sometimes hear it's a bit dodgy. I didn't do it in my garden, but what I'll probably do is unplug the VTX, plug in the battery, see if it can get some sats, and then plug that in after, because those VTXs overheat quickly. And then the idea is to try it on 25 milliwatts, because I've no idea what to expect and what the power output sort of gives you in terms of range and stuff. So give it a fly around, not do anything too tricky, and depending how that looks, we'll bump the power up and see what we get. I'm looking forward to finally flying this, and it's a lovely day. It's quite breezy, but this is a big 7-inch quad. It shouldn't have any problem. So yeah, let's do it. Well, here's the first flight at 25 milliwatts, but it was not straightforward. I got there, I turned everything on, had a lovely picture through the goggles, but didn't have any OSD, and the quad wasn't responding to any controls. It seemed to have completely locked up, although I was getting some telemetry. This seems to be a problem with the quad, and I wasn't sure what was happening. First I thought, you know, maybe there's some wire or something, and I messed about with it. I rebooted it several times, checked stuff out. Eventually I got the OSD up and the quad responding. I was a little bit nervous to fly it, but I thought, you know, I'll keep it in pretty close, I'll take it easy, because really I shouldn't be flying it when I've got unexplained problems. But because this was like 1 day in 2 weeks that I had, and I didn't have any more, I thought I'd better go for it. Anyway, I'll come back to that later. But what do I think of the picture? Well, it's lovely and bright, but there are these little patches of what I would call smear. It's basically a compression artifact where you've got these patches of grasses. Sometimes you'll see they sort of smear together into a big lump. I know this was an early problem with them, but you can still kind of see it. So I'm just aware of that one. But the picture's nice. What I noticed is I needed to go back and set my IPD again. I've been using the goggles just to check things out and make sure they're okay, and they looked fine. But as soon as I was flying, and it's quite a wide field of view, I noticed that I had it wasn't quite right in one of the corners, and it was also a hot day. I was sweating around trying to get things sorted out, and so I had one side of my goggles, I think my right eye was steaming up. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to come back and I'm going to whack the power up to 200 milliwatts, and I'm going to go out and fly again. But we would see that on 25 milliwatts it did pretty well. The signal got down to like 1, that's equivalent to 1 bar on a number of occasions, but we had absolutely no issues with freezing up or anything like that. Focus mode isn't on for this, so if we had a problem we would expect basically to see sort of lockups and the latency to go out, but everything looked pretty good. It felt pretty good to fly. A little bit wobbly. I hadn't done any tuning. This was just a base 4.4 thing. But okay, I thought let's bring it down again. Let's launch it on 200 and see what the difference is. I have to say, it was tricky to find myself in the field, and even trickier to think, where's the landing pad? There it is. Drop. Okay, next flight. I'm afraid this is a shorter flight as things went wrong, but I'll tell you what I'm doing here. I'm in 25 megabits per second and in 60 frames per second, 720p on the DVR. So what you're seeing there is what recording on the goggles, and it's a pretty accurate way of what I saw. The only thing different is the stuff down the bottom that says the signal and stuff, and you'll notice we've got signal 1, so that's low, but latency wise it's looking good. That would appear as little graphs in the goggles. We got a bit of screen flashing there, and I haven't put the latest firmware on. I'm thinking that's one of the problems fixed by that. But where it went wrong here is as we go along, basically I had a sudden dip of the quad, like it just lost something and dipped like that, and at that point the entire quad went down and I was looking at a bit of a frozen screen as I was behind something. If we have a look at the footage that I pulled off the internal member of the VTX, you can see that it felt a little bit like if you've ever flown an SPI quad on FreeSky, they used to kind of overload their CPU and freeze for just a split second. It felt like that. So at some point it froze. I got control partially back where I kind of righted it, and then it had this crash here which turned out to suffer no actual damage. So ignoring that crash for now, I find it quite interesting how it handles the signal reducing. You can see here we've got a signal of 1. The latency stays the same, and basically it just lowers the bitrate, so you get a worse looking image, but it keeps the feel the same, which is something I think I'd prefer, because there's absolutely no variation in the feel of the quad there. It's at least consistent. So in the goggles, if you go to playback and you select one of your recordings and press play, you'll get this. Very clear, very good, all lovely, but doesn't have the OSD unless you click the OSD button up here. This was a fairly late release actually in the firmware, and once you have OSD enabled, you go ahead and press play again, you get all the OSD information. You can see the slight difference I have at the bottom of the screen where I have the stuff from the goggles. But how do you do that with your own playback on a computer? I went back to the WalkSnail Avatar Q&A and I found there was this link to this GitHub project for that, and if I open that, we get to here, and the first thing it says is this repository is no longer maintained in favour of this one. So then I went to that one, and that had a tool to download, and so I went ahead and downloaded it. You obviously get that from just going to the latest release and downloading for whatever you have, and many of you will have Windows, which is here. I've got Intel Mac OS, and there's also Apple Silicon. However, I did have a problem with this. If I run it, it says you can't use this version of the application with this version of Mac OS. Basically, it wants Mac OS 12 or later. I appreciate this is not many of you, but what I did find is that this was a packaging error. If you open up the package and look at the binary, you can actually run it. And I did go ahead and open an issue on their page, and I don't know the Rust build system well enough to fix it myself, but hopefully it's fixable. You can pass out a string so you can build it or package it up for a lesser version, so hopefully that'll sort itself out. But in the meantime, what I did is I just I actually built this for myself, but what you can do is, as I said, go inside the package and do it. And if I show you what this looks like, and this is basically my directory with all the files I've pulled off the DVR. I'll just run this binary here, which is going to look a bit weird. But this is what you get. You get, get rid of that. You get the option to open a video file, an OSD file, an SRT file, and a font file. You will need a font file. Where do you get the font file from? If you go back to the Cadex download page, it's kind of all over the place. You've got to have a few things open. There is a thing that says FC OSD fonts update. And this tells you about how to update the fonts, which I'm going to do in a separate video. But inside here is this user bf24.ping and user bf36.ping. If you grab hold of those, if you're using Betaflight, these are the ones that are actually used in the goggles. So grab those, stick them in the directory. If you look in this directory, I've got them here. I've got the user bf24, user bf26. And what these are, if you're familiar with the old school sprite sheets, it's kind of like that. There are a bunch of graphics, and it obviously knows to cut out a certain amount and use them. So you can see how you can use your own or use other people's. Anyway, what you do with this is you pull off all the files from each of your flights, and each of your flights will have a normal MP4 file, and that is just the general file without any OSD. That's what you see in your goggles. And then you have this SRT file. If you're familiar with an SRT file, it's a subtitle file. And this file basically has all the goggle info. And what it has a timestamp when it wants it there, and then it has all the information. And this uses that to put it in places. Then what you have is this .osd file, which is a little bit weird. If you look at that, it's essentially the bits of your OSD over and over again. And so this obviously processes this file and shoves it all in the right places with all the various bits and pieces you might have there. So what you do, if we just go and grab some files, we've already got our font name there. So if we go ahead and open a video file, so I've already processed this one, but we can do it again. Basically open all your files like that, and then what it does is give you a preview rendering frame. And from the stuff in the goggles options, which is here, you can see you can turn off and turn on things like the time, the battery of the VTX, the battery of your goggles, and I'm just having signal distance, bitrate, and latency. And then all you have to do is render it. You can change the bitrate, change the type between H.264, H.265, and hit start render. And it takes about a minute for that particular one. And what we get then is this thing that says with OSD. And if we look at that, then we've got our regular flight you just saw with the OSD. All good. Another feature, although this is listed experimental, is you can mask certain positions. So, for example, I don't like to show my GPS coordinates because, you know, I'm on private land, I don't want anyone else there. You can go ahead here, and let's say I didn't want people to know my altitude. I could mask that out, and then it's gone. If I render that again, and then what we get this time is exactly the same output, but with that info missing, which I think is really quite a neat feature. Well, I'd have certainly liked to have flown this a bit more, but at least I've got enough to give a few conclusions and thoughts about the system. First off, I really like the variable bitrate and keeping the latency together. It didn't feel any different to flying a regular quad. But that said, I was cruising around, I wasn't doing anything intense, so latency I couldn't feel it, and I like the fact that the latency remained fairly constant and only the bitrate changed. When I first started flying it and looking what the picture looked like, I thought, oh, this looks really nice. And then I thought, as I'm flying around, is it really a step up from analog? And then later on I flew analog in the same field at the same day, and I was like, yeah, that's a hell of an upgrade. So you might not notice it immediately when you look in the goggles, because it's like, oh, it looks really nice. Does it look different? Yeah, just put a set of analog goggles on and you'll see the difference. There were certainly some little bits of the image that wasn't as good as I would have liked. The smearing of the grass where you get that compression artifact. So that might be an interesting test to run that at 50 megabits per second to see if it improves the clarity there. I also noticed something interesting. I changed my frame rate to high, so I was getting 100 frames per second through the goggles, but the DVR only ever records at 60 frames per second. So although I'm saying, hey, you're pretty much seeing what I'm getting from the goggles, I'm getting a slightly better view because I'm getting more frames, but you get a pretty good impression of what it's like. But on the short flights I had, felt really nice, felt very good, didn't feel like, you know, it was slow to respond or anything, so that's good. The question of what's up with this quad. Fortunately it took no damage, I cleaned it up, everything's fine. As I mentioned when I talked about upgrading this to 4.4, I found some issues with the flight controller. This has a Success F7 Twin-G in it, and I saw some issues opened on Betaflight about upgrading the 4.4.1 and then the USB not working, or essentially bricking the flight controller, and they had to move back. But I didn't see anything on 4.4.0, so that's what I used. And then, since looking up some more, I found some people having problems on 4.4.0. It was mainly to do with either the board defaults being wrong and causing issues, or a USB not working. And when I came back to try it again, I had loads of issues. When I first tested it in the garden, it was fine. I turned it on, looked at the goggles several times, everything seemed fine, flew it in the garden, that was fine. Just here on the desk, after I got back, I was trying stuff out, and basically I can power it up, and I disconnected all the WalkSnail stuff to make sure it wasn't that. Powered it up, and basically the board would not boot correctly, so I could arm it, nothing happened, nothing happening back from the radio, reboot it, and then it'd be okay, and then it'd go bad again. And it's kind of the same with USB. I plug in USB, it seems to power up correctly, but the lights on the flight controller are sometimes wrong, and then the USB doesn't connect. So the answer to this, according to the Betaflight devs, looking at the other stuff, is to look at either 422 or 4.5, both of which haven't been released yet and are nightlies. So I can do that because it's easy to replicate the problem and see if it can solve it. I don't know if I'll be flying it on a nightly unless I get, you know, at least up to like a release candidate or something I'd prefer. But at least I can try and see if I can fix the problem there. In the meantime, in the last video I made, I wasn't sure about some aspects of the goggles and what some of the menu items did. I talked to WalkSnail since, and I've got some answers for you there. First off, I looked at the zoom mode expecting something to happen and nothing did, and I got the answer that that's not implemented yet. I don't know why they have it there if it's not implemented, maybe just leave it blank or something. I speculated that focus mode was pretty much the same as how DJI did it, where they try and keep the centre of the screen clear as they can if you're getting a worse signal, and basically the ends of it become pixelated. And WalkSnail said yes, it's worked like that, but it's more radical. I don't know what that means, but I'm guessing it's like they can get really pixelated and to keep the centre of your screen clear. I also didn't look at the sharing menu because I didn't really understand what it was, along with the fact that you had this broadcast that you could turn on or off. Now, just after I released the first video, a new firmware was released, which is 33.39.10, which I didn't fly with. And that implements the sharing mode. And what happens is you turn your broadcast on, and then if you go to sharing mode, if someone's got the broadcast on, you can actually see which channel they're on and look at that way. The other thing that should fix is they said there was a white balance flicker from the Pro camera. I noticed a bit of flickering on that video, so I am going to upgrade that when I get done with this and try that out. The last thing I asked about was viewfinder, which got an interesting response from the support guy who said it's of no practical use. I don't know why they did it. He said it's to keep the view the same as the GoPro. I don't know if that's aspect ratio or resolution or what, but he was saying no practical use, so we'll leave that for now. It doesn't seem particularly useful. Anyway, I'm going to leave that here because I don't like to make these videos too long, else you won't be able to find the information in it. But what's going to come up? Well, obviously I'll be trying to fix that quad first off. I'll be doing a quick video about how to update the fonts and checking it out for myself. I didn't want to bundle it all in here because it's just too much info then. I'll be looking at gyroflow and seeing if we can make the clips tidier. Fortunately, I've got help from Chris, who helped a really lot last time with the little Runcam film cameras and getting decent results out of there. Greg from Menace RC sent me these digital HD antennas, so once we get everything flying, it'd be really interesting to check if we get a better signal on those at range than the standard ones we get. And coming up very soon, because I can't wait to fly again, I'll be taking out the baseline quad, which has the little tiny WalkSnail system in it, along with a ELRS receiver, so this should be cool for like just going out locally and going up the woods and stuff like that. Anyway, that'll be coming up. I hope that's helpful in the meantime. Got any questions, you can ping them to me, and there'll be some product links down below as well. Anyway, catch you in the next one. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.